All right. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We're so excited to have people here. We are still waiting on two of our panelists, one of whom is on the East Coast or the West Coast of the US, so it's still bright and early for her. I hope that she's just getting coffee and will join us when she's ready. And then our other is, I believe, in Belgium. Where is Fabian located?
It's from the Netherlands.
From the Netherlands, okay. So we have, we're spanning a lot of time zones right now. Aubrey has just joined us, so now we are down to missing one, and we will go ahead and get started so as to not waste too much of our presenters' valuable time. So I'm gonna allow each person to introduce themselves. I could spend the next hour talking about each person here, but that's not why anyone's here today. So we'll go ahead and start with Kelly. If you could just give us a bit of an overview of who you are, what your trajectory is, what your background is, and what brought you into what you're doing now and what brought you here.
Hi, everyone. Good whatever hour of the day it is for you. I'm, excuse me, I'm Kelly Escobar. I work currently at the Robin Hood Foundation in New York City, which is New York City's largest poverty fighting organization, where we work to support individuals out of poverty and into economic mobility through supporting programs that infuse evidence-based programming into community-based organizations and partnerships across city and state to redefine policy measures that might impact the everyday lives of individuals living in poverty. A bit of my trajectory, I was a hardcore psychologist all from undergraduate into my graduate PhD life. I went to Villanova University in Pennsylvania, got my undergraduate bachelor's in psychology and general psychology, and then a master's as well in experimental psychology, where I did a lot of, at the time, just stereotypical lab-based work that was very more about advancing theory. I then applied and got accepted to a PhD program at NYU in the School of Steinhardt School of Culture and Education, where there was a focus on applied psychology. And so during my PhD, I did a lot more work in the field, doing a lot more intervention development, working with directly community organizations, to learn about their populations, both collect data, but also support their own programming in a way that was a mutual relationship. And throughout my PhD program, really transitioning from the more experimental mindset to the applied mindset, and especially working in New York City with a lot of impoverished communities, is really when I started to think that the work that I wanted my everyday life to do, I wanted to have an everyday impact on individuals. And so I started to explore opportunities outside of academia. I love academia, I love research, I do miss it, but for me, I think the priority in the immediate term was more, how can I take the knowledge that I've learned and derived from communities and give back to that community right away. And at the time, for me, the research to publication to then getting awareness for the publication process was a little bit too slow for what I wanted to see in everyday change. So it brought me to the Robin Hood Foundation, where is a little bit different from other foundation work in that we do support direct service work with communities, but it all is within the mindset of using science and evidence-based programming. So it's a step above a kind of charity. We don't just give money for the sake of giving money, but rather we make sure that the money that we give is being allocated in ways that support evidence-based programming. So I really am still able to use my psychology training and research training to fully evaluate the programs that are being proposed. Sometimes communities will come up with their own programming. So we work with them to think from the like theory of change mindset and what's the evaluative mindset that they're looking at. And really just being able to think of how this is going to impact children in a longer term, more so than just the direct having cash on hand type of charity giving. So that's a little bit about my own trajectory. Thanks.
Thanks, Kelly. Priya, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited for the rest of the panel. So I started similarly to Kelly. So I did an undergraduate in psychology and then went on to a master's in cognitive neuroscience, and then ended up doing my PhD in developmental psychology. All of this was in the UK. During my PhD, I loved my PhD, I love research, but I became like very disillusioned with the state of research in general because of the reproducibility crisis. And I became very excited about open science and a massive open science advocate. And I started being kind of thinking about whether there was any route for me in future jobs that would be kind of more centered on that than any individual area of research, even though I really did enjoy kind of the specific developmental research I was doing, and I would be interested in continuing with that as well. But the kind of thing that I was passionate about above all was like how science is done and improving science more generally. But so then after my PhD, I was continuing on the kind of academic trajectory. I got a postdoc and then did that for a few months before COVID hit. And so during the postdoc, I couldn't find a postdoc that was where I was living. So I had to, so I'd moved back in with my mum and was actually commuting back every weekend to see my wife, which was horrible to not be with her and also to be traveling all the time like that. But that was just kind of the reality of academic life. I was told was just you have to move around and that's just what's expected. So I did it. And I enjoyed the postdoc overall, but the thing that I didn't like about it was the lack of autonomy. Like I know that not all postdocs are like this, but my one was very much like, you are paid to work on this project. Anything else that's not part of this project, you will have to do in your spare time, which I know is the case for a lot of postdocs, maybe not others. But I didn't like that. I wanted to work on all my side projects. I was excited about them. Like I said, I was passionate about like doing talks about how to improve science and things like that. So I didn't like that I had to do that in my spare time. And the other thing that I was scared about was that when we were going to be going into schools to test, even though COVID was happening, I didn't feel comfortable with that. And then also the issue of being long distance from my wife. So those were the three reasons that even though I still had over a year left on my postdoc, I was looking for other jobs. And a friend actually sent me an advert for a job which was part-time, and it was consultancy based, which basically, for anyone who doesn't know, it just means basically you're paid hourly and you claim your hours and you do them whenever you want. It's not like a kind of part-time contract, and it's also, yeah, it's not a contract basically. But yeah, it was a part-time role at the Journal Editors Discussion Interface, which is basically an online community for journal editors to discuss things together, but the kind of overarching aim was to help them to increase openness and transparency policies at their journals and improve their journals in other ways. And so that really excited me to be involved in something like top-down change for science. So I quit my full-time postdoc and took something much less concrete in a part-time consultancy position. And that was actually based in the US, but it was completely remote, so I was able to just do it from home. So then, because that was part-time, I kept my eye out for other opportunities as well. And I actually emailed, I'd been kind of in interview stages for a job at the Center for Open Science a while back, like during my PhD. And so I just emailed my contact there and asked, is there anything casual like that is there anything casual part-time going at the moment? And he just said, yeah, there actually is. It's a really good time for you to ask that. And so I got another part-time consultancy position at the Center for Open Science as a research scientist. So the Journal Editors Discussion Interface job is a community management role, which is like no research, but just basically managing this community of editors, trying to build up momentum and get them to talk to each other, and curate resources and things like that. Whereas the research scientist position at the Center for Open Science is research. It's just that I'm part of a massive project and it's not based in university. and I'm kind of one very small cog in the machine as opposed to leading the project. Yeah, so that's where I'm at now. Both of those roles are, like I said, consultancy, not a lot of stability. Both of the contracts end probably next summer, not contracts, but like agreements. So yeah, it's not a very long-term solution, but I'm enjoying it for now. Yeah, I think that's about it for now.
So very much the alt-in and alt-academic career. And Eben?
Yeah, hi, I'm Eben Witherspoon. I am currently a researcher at American Institutes for Research, based in Chicago, but we're all based from home now. And I got my PhD in the learning sciences, which is in the education department at the University of Pittsburgh. And I sort of had a slightly different trajectory, maybe. So I came to graduate school after working as a teacher for maybe about 5 years in Detroit. So I taught high school math. And through that, I was also a mentor for a robotics team, and I started getting interested in sort of the crossover between what students were learning in the robotics context and how they were transferring that information into their math classroom. And as I got teaching is very tiring, as any of you who have done it know. And I started looking around for some ways, and it was interesting to hear Kelly talk about sort of this other direction of like wanting to have more immediate impact. And I definitely felt in the classroom I was able to have that immediate impact, but I also felt very constrained by some of the politics of I was in a district charter school, so there were a lot of unionization efforts that I was a part of, and I was also became a teacher through Teach for America, which is a whole other set of issues that I won't talk about now. But for a lot of reasons, I decided that I wanted to look sort of outside the classroom to see how I can maybe have a larger and broader impact. Found my advisor who was doing math work based in robotics, so very like particular and well aligned to what my interests were. Applied, got there, and quickly realized that grad school was not like my thing. Had a pretty rough time. I think that there's a certain amount of like uncertainty that's built into getting your PhD, but that didn't interact well with my baseline level of anxiety. And so as I started going through the process, I got into post coursework, post comps year, and started thinking that I might be wanting to go somewhere else than academia, because I sort of, from what I was hearing, felt that academic track would just be some more of the same. It didn't seem like there was going to be this like endpoint where I like got my PhD and then everything came up roses. It would just be a different form of the grind. And so I started looking around. I actually strategically asked a few people from non-academic positions to be on my dissertation committee, just to sort of see, what their lives were like, get to know them a little bit, and hopefully use that as leverage to get a job after. And in terms of like the final decision of like what I wanted to do, I mean, I am going to say that money was a big part of it, and I think that's sort of like something you're not supposed to say, right? You're supposed to have this like higher purpose for why you're doing this, but I generally find that people who say that have never had to worry about money before. And I think it's a perfectly reasonable reason to pursue any position. Also, location was big for me. My partner's family is all in Chicago, so being able to point to a place on the map and say this is where I want to go was definitely didn't seem like it was an option for the academic route. It was also timing. As I said, I took some time off before grad school. My partner and I were thinking of having kids, and just thinking about this like next 5 to 10 to question mark years of a tenure attempt with sort of the uncertainty that's built into that just didn't seem like a very tenable thing. So I applied, got this job, and then immediately COVID hit. And so the only time I've actually been in my office in Chicago was for the interview. Since then, I've been working remote, which I think gives me a certain like interesting view of what this particular alt academic route might be like. But and I can talk more about that in the questions. But yeah, I think I've now been at AAR for about a year, and I think there's a certain extent of like the grass is always greener. There are parts of academia that I miss. There's parts of teaching that I miss. There's parts of my job here that I really enjoy and didn't expect. So yeah, so that's sort of where I'm at now.
Thanks, Eben. Laura?
Hi, everyone. So excited to talk to you all today. I'm coming to you from the DC area, and my path is a little bit different to everyone else here, of course, but I started off actually doing infant research in undergrad. It was all throughout in psychology and the learning sciences. And really, when I was thinking about what to do after undergrad, I wanted to do something more applied in terms of research. And so I sought out, professors that were doing that kind of work, and was really interested in Rachel Barr in particular, because it was around the time when the iPad had first come out, and we didn't really know a lot about how kids were learning from media, in particular interactive media. And so, the PhD program that I was also interested in was one of a few in the country that had this combination of psychology and also public policy training. So I was able to take classes in both of those fields and get more exposure to different types of work in that sense. And along my PhD, I always kept an open mind in terms of what I wanted to do next. I wasn't, set on one particular path. I was trying to explore different routes. So I would always look for different opportunities to get some type of exposure to different career paths, whether it's, there's a meeting going on in DC. We're looking for a note taker. Can anyone help? And so I'd always volunteer and say, I'd love to, be a fly on the wall at this meeting. So I would take notes when Sesame Workshop came into town and had a meeting around a public health topic or something like that, just to get exposure. And yeah, I ended up, after my PhD, pursuing a postdoc fellowship. Still not clear exactly what my path was going to be, but there were a number of reasons why this particular position made sense for me as my next step. One was the great fit between the research that I had been doing previously around kids learning from media and early STEM learning. Is the exact continuation of the type of research I was doing. But it also was giving me some new skills that I wanted to learn along the way, both in terms of translation and dissemination, but also getting the opportunity to work with an app developer and create some new media based on the research questions that we had for a particular project. And so, I was really excited to do that, but then also location was a factor for me as well in deciding where to go next. My partner at the time, he was at DC, and I wanted to be as close as possible to where he was. So Delaware was just a couple hours away, so it made it easy enough to still come back on the weekends. Although long distance was not ideal. It was the best of my my postdoc fellowship options. And so I went there for 2 years. Along the way, again, still trying to keep an open mind about what I was doing next and exploring different possible routes. And so one of the things that meant for me was looking at different types of conferences that maybe were more industry focused. And I can talk more about that later, but getting to know people at these different meetings that were working in industry and different types of careers, but still using research for different goals, whether it's developing something or applying it to a different purpose. So I was continually doing research and trying to figure out what all is out there. And then eventually, after my fellowship, I went to SRI Education, which is a nonprofit group. I was working out of the DC office there, but they are also based around the country and internationally. So I was doing education research for them for a bit. And eventually, after a little while, I decided to start up my own company. So for a little over a year, I've been a researcher independently, consulting with other organizations through my company called Tech Play Collaborative. And our mission is really to support positive child outcomes through the partnerships that we form with other companies. So we're acting like a bridge between research and technologists, educators, policymakers, and other researchers that are working in various different settings, whether it's another research institute, a research group within a technology or children's media organization, or otherwise. So really excited to be here today and talk to you more about my path.
Great, thanks, Laura. And Aubrey, I know you have a slightly different path than the learning sciences psychology route. Do you want to talk about who you are?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm calling in from Oakland, California. So good morning. It's a little early over here. I'm still getting myself started. But yes, Andy, as he alluded to, my background is actually as a biomedical engineer. And I very much identify as an engineer, not a scientist necessarily or a researcher, but more of an engineer and a builder in my mindset. And I love the intentionality in everyone's paths. And I'll just start by saying that my path was shaped a lot by outside forces, I think, and some intentionality, of course, but a lot of outside forces. So I'll just say that I was never meant to be a biomedical engineer, I don't think, but I grew up in a relatively high poverty situation, and I was really good at math and science, and I really was drawn to political science. I took this class called Lessons in Humanity, and I loved it. I loved history. I loved social studies, but I was really good at math and I was really good at science. And everybody kept telling me, be an engineer, you'll be able to pay off your student loan debt. And so I did that. And I had some amazing mentors along the way who encouraged me to keep going in biomedical engineering. And the reason I chose biomedical engineering was because I really wanted to help people. I wanted my work to have a positive impact on people as quickly as possible. And so of all the engineering fields, I thought, well, biomedical engineers help people, right, in terms of health. And so I thought this would be the best path. And I did that for undergrad. And sometime in undergrad, I started working in a lab and doing research, which was really in the field of kind of biomaterials development. And it was great. I loved it. I loved the research process. I loved the scientific process. I loved developing and testing things. I loved engineering methodologies. It never quite felt right, but at the end of undergrad, I still wasn't quite sure where to go. And my advisor was like, oh, you're really good at this. You should get a PhD. And I thought, okay, I can't afford that, Julie. And she laughed and said, somebody will pay you to do that. And I thought, oh, okay, someone's going to pay me to go to school. What a great opportunity. Let's do that. So now here I am, a young grad student at Duke, realizing like, I really, a little bit similar to you, Eben, like I am in the wrong place. What am I doing here? I don't think this is what I want to do with my life. But it took me a few years to kind of figure that out. And during that time, that's when Obama was running for president. And so I got really involved in Durham for Obama. And I probably spent more time with that than I did inside the research lab, much to my advisor's dismay. And started to realize like, okay, this is probably not the path for me, but I was more than halfway through my PhD and something about quitting just seemed wrong, that I couldn't do it. And so I thought, okay, I'll start to figure out what I'm going to do after grad school. And I sort of rejected this academia or industry mindset, which is what exists in the biomedical engineering field for the most part. Probably is true across a lot of fields, but very true in engineering fields. You're going to be an academic or you're going to go into industry. And there are a lot of industry jobs, right? There's a lot of devices that need to be developed and therapeutics that need to be developed. And so that was a very common path, not to go in academia and to go into industry, but I wasn't particularly interested in that either. And so I got involved in a group that was doing a lot of scientific communication work called Science Sunday, which was around the time that Google Plus launched. And we did a lot of trying to engage with the public around science and communicating science. And I similarly started exploring paths towards science policy, the AAAS Fellowship, things of that nature. And so I was pretty certain for a period of time that I wasn't going to go into academia, probably wasn't going to go into industry, but how might I leverage skills that I had gained to go in perhaps a science communication or a science policy direction. And around that time, I was coming to the end of my PhD, and I was diagnosed with a brain aneurysm, actually. And so I ended up having to put everything on pause and have brain surgery. And that really gave me a boldness to think really differently about what I actually wanted to do. So I thankfully recovered. It took a while, but I finished my PhD. And after that, decided, like, I don't know, I don't think science policy or science communication necessarily is exactly where I want to go. And at that time, my boyfriend, who's now my husband, had taken a job out here in the Bay Area. And it was an interesting thing to experience not having to make money to pay my bills. I could rely on him a little bit for getting by. So I decided just to finish my PhD, move to California and figure it out. And that's when I really kind of did some reflection and thought about how my interest really did lie within the field of education, not necessarily as a teacher, but thinking about how do we build tools for education, and how do we take some of our engineering methodologies and design methodologies that I had learned in the field of engineering and think about where that might fit within the field of education. And I started emailing a lot of people, and one of them was Karen Cater, who was the former CEO of Digital Promise and is now at Apple. And she answered me, which was really crazy. I just kind of said, like, hey, this is what I'm interested in. And she answered and said, sure, I'm happy to talk. And we got to talking, and she said, I'm actually hiring for a research director position. And I said, oh, I know, I applied. And she sort of laughed. And I mean, it makes sense, of course. Why would she pick out this resume of somebody with a degree in biomedical engineering for an education nonprofit work that's learning science focused? She'd be much more likely to pick somebody on this call. But she agreed to let me come in and interview for the position. And after a lot of interviewing, agreed to offer me the position. And so my first sort of job out of my PhD was the research director at Digital Promise, which really was focused on thinking about this intersection of research and education practice and learning science, and how we bring folks together to partner in different ways to address education challenges. So really focused on kind of research practice partnership work, facilitating collaboration between these groups, as well as communicating learning sciences research, which really connected back to some of the previous work that I had done. So I'll pause there so we can have more discussion, but I'll say that the thing I most leverage every day from my PhD is biomedical engineering is a field that was created because a bunch of other fields couldn't collaborate super well, right? So biologists and chemists and engineers and doctors couldn't collaborate super well in a way. And so biomedical engineering actually came about because of a foundation that said somebody needs to be this intersectional person, this intersectional expertise. And that is probably the skill I leverage most in my work today, which is with the EF+Math program, which really funds teams of researchers and developers and educators to build new math learning approaches through inclusive R&D methods. And so we're hiring, by the way, in case anybody's interested, just a little plug there. I'll stop there, but thanks, Andy. Excited to be here with you all.
Thanks. I didn't know that you were hiring, and this is not a plant. Good for folks on here to know. Fabian, would you like to introduce yourself?
Of course. So my path, if you look back at my path, it all seems like it all connects really well, but in between all the steps there was a lot of stress. So I'm also representing Europe mainland here. I think I'm the only one from the mainland Europe, but things are also a little bit different here in terms of how university works and stuff. So I'll see if I can kind of explain a little bit with my path. So I did both a bachelor's and a master's degree. So a bachelor's degree is in psychology, And then during my bachelor's degree, like most people who do psychology, you kind of go in there thinking it's like you want to help people and go into clinical practice, because that's like what a lot of people who go into psychology think. And then during my last year, I kind of thought, well, research is kind of cool. So I decided to go to a research master's instead of a regular master's, which focuses more on the research part. And I really liked the research, but I wasn't completely sure yet. But luckily during my master's, I was able to do both a research internship and a clinical internship. And I thought, well, let's just make things hard on myself and do both at the same time. So I was in a private practice during the time for my for both research and clinical internships, where I learned that while the clinical practice was fun, it wasn't for me, because I was a bit too well, curious. It's probably something that a lot of researchers will recognize. Like the work is fun, but you don't want to do the same thing every day. Even though it's a different client every day, it's still kind of the same work. So I decided to go into research, applying for Pgds. Didn't get one right away, because Pgds here, it's more like a normal job that you can apply for, and less of a continuation of your studies. So we're also not students here as Pgds, we are all proper university employees. So it took me about 2 years. So I was applying for 2 years, but not all at the, like continuously, because PhDs also come in seasons, you know, when the funding comes in. So it took me about 2 years before I landed my PhD. And during that time, I had a job as a statistician, because apparently I was pretty good at statistics. Well, fairly good, I suppose. And eventually I did get a PhD. So then I did my PhD in cognitive developmental neuroscience. This is a lot of fancy words, but I was just like annoying mostly students and some kids with EEG equipment. It's a lot of fun. And I finished that now. I still have to defend and everything, but everything's submitted. So like, as far as I'm concerned, I'm done. But I had some of the same thoughts as a lot of people. So what Eben said about like, okay, so if I go through with the whole research career path, where am I going to end up? Because I saw the people who were a little bit further ahead of me, like doing the postdocs and doing the university teacher positions and the professors and everything. And from what I was seeing is the further you got along in the research career path, the less of the fun research things you were doing, at least the stuff that I thought was fun. They were doing less of the actual research and data analysis and setting up experiments and doing experiments, and more being in a management position, basically, and delegating to their PhDs and postdocs and doing a lot more teaching and a whole lot of paperwork and a lot of bureaucracy. And I was like, I don't think I want to do that. So I was already looking for a while, just seeing what my options were outside of academia. And then when the time came, I also applied for different jobs. So I leveraged my statistical skills, or my analysis skills, that I got during my PhD and also before, until I eventually got the opportunity to be a data scientist in a fairly big digital marketing agency here in the Netherlands. And that's where I'm at now. So I completely stepped out of academia, although for like a month or two, I was kind of doing 2 jobs at the same time, because I still had to finish my thesis. But since that's done now, I can completely focus on a new job. I think that's it for now.
Great. Thank you so much, all of you, for giving us a bit of insight as to how you got where you are now. It sounds like a lot of it has been kind of planting seeds, reaching out to people, and being kind of bold with the emails and asking the right people at the right times, or showing up at the right places at the right times, and really putting yourself out there. So we got a series of questions from people here today, or people who are going to watch this video later. And so I would love to ask a few of those, but if anyone has any other questions, feel free to drop them in the chat or raise your hand. If you do, as we ask these questions, I don't think that everyone needs to answer, but if you feel that you have something to add, please feel free to jump in. So one question that came up a lot, and Aubrey kind of touched on this, was what skills are you leveraging that you learned in your PhD, or that you gained through your PhD, that you're kind of using on a day-to-day basis now? So I know all of your jobs are very different. So for some people, it's kind of project management related. Other people, it's statistics. Other people, it's kind of consuming and translating research. But I'd love to hear kind of what you think are the things that you might highlight if you're applying to a job now, saying that you have a PhD in developmental science.
I'll jump in for the first one then. So, well, obviously, then of course the skills like programming and statistics are important in my job, and I think it would be good for everyone to know programming. But that aside, there are some general skills that we usually don't think of as PhDs because they seem so obvious. But stuff like our ability to just solve problems, because that's what we do every day, all day. You get a problem and you solve it. And it seems very obvious. And you think like, oh no, everyone can do that. But that's because you're in an environment where everyone is doing that. Especially if you're still in academia, you're still doing your PhD. Everyone around you is doing more or less the same thing as you. So you're not really it doesn't really stand out as much as it would elsewhere. So all those things you can do. Also what you said, the project management, your own planning, your time management skills, all that kind of stuff, that's all important. And you can pretty much leverage anything when you apply for jobs in industry. You just have to make sure that you frame it in the right way and really think about, okay, what do I do every single day? And try and distance yourself from the environment itself. Because just because everyone can do it, that's not as much everyone as you think it is. It's just because that's everyone in your environment that can do that. But outside of academia, the environment is very different.
I totally agree, Fabian. You are very narrowly consumed in your own space where you're like, I don't do this as well as this person or so, but then you leave that space and you're like, wow, I have all these skills that other people don't have, and you don't realize that you have. So that is great. I would even extend as far as to say that, and I think I've learned this more, especially having started working remotely, is that oftentimes the technical skills and many other skills that you need will be trained on the job, especially as different industries might have a different philosophy around how they want their work environment to be. What I would try to emphasize are those unique sets of skills that necessarily wouldn't be everyday type of training. So in psychology, for instance, or in research in general, I would say that your ability to really think critically about things from different angles is a big skill that is not often thought about at a job that has its own priorities and mindsets. So really being able to emphasize how you can look at a problem or a solution from multiple different angles and take different perspectives and different mindsets into it, I think is really something that companies value. And also with that, I mean, this is a little bit more statistics specific, but I guess like for me, something that was really helpful was being able to really understand just how far numbers actually define something. So like, you know, you can read, and I like to think about this in like newspaper headlines, right? So like you read the newspaper headline, it says has a significant impact, and the normal population will be, oh my God, this is a major problem, right? But then you look at the statistics and the significant impact is this much in the scope of the grand problem. Being able to take that skill and interpret and really manage expectations of what the problem is and how to approach that solution, I think is another valuable skill that, you know, statistics is a very narrowly trained skill set. So many people won't really know that, and that is a huge value, and you're not really going to be trained on many jobs in that aren't using statistics as their everyday, but yet how we think about everyday problems often relies on those statistical analyses.
Yeah, I would just chime in on that, saying that it's at least at AAR, there's like a whole population of people who are just straight up programmers, and like that's what they do, and that's what they're trained to do, and that's a particular skill set. But what that doesn't bring with it is what I think is the value add of a PhD, is that it really, like, even if you're dealing with a statistical problem above and beyond like the rote like programming language knowledge, it's how do you come up with an interesting question, leverage the data that you have to answer that question, right? It's all those other parts around how you formulate the analysis that you're doing, rather than just like, you know, do I know R? So yeah, I think that's, you know, it's a hard skill, like Fabian was saying. It's, you know, it seems like this amorphous sort of thing, and it's a hard skill to make clear, but I think it's also great that it is applicable in a lot of different contexts.
All right, thank you so much. We're going to move on to the next question. Ilse, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, so jumping on that previous question, maybe the other way around, what were the skills that you were maybe not prepared for, that you had to develop in this new position that was new to you?
Yeah, I can talk a bit about my job as a research scientist at the Centre for Open Science, because that's the one that I feel like, in theory, I felt was going to be really similar, but so then it's interesting what the differences are when you're not doing research in a university setting. And the main thing was that the vibe was this very like startup-y vibe, and also very tech oriented, because there's also kind of the tech side of the Centre for Open Science that runs the Open Science Framework, for example. So that's the kind of energy around. And so all the work is organized in terms of like sprints of like 2 weeks, and you have like very specific like numerical goals that you're going to achieve in those sprints. And then if you don't, you like have to talk about it and work out how to like manage expectations for the next sprint. And everything is very fast paced. The research that we're working on is funded by DARPA, so they have like very specific outcomes that they want. So we don't have like freedom to we don't have that much freedom to go outside of that in what we're delivering to them, even if we don't necessarily think that like that's the most theoretically interesting part or way of kind of using the data that we've got and things like that. So yeah, so I guess to take that back to like skills, I guess like very knowing how to set your own goals and knowing what to expect from yourself in very specific time scales is something that I definitely didn't learn in my PhD. I feel like it was just like a joke in academia that everyone always thinks things are going to take less long than they're going to take, and that was just accepted and fine, and it's completely normal to like ask for deadline extensions on paper submissions or on conference applications and things like that. That's just like the thing you do. So not having that was scary and something to adapt to. But I think, yeah, it's the kind of thing you can definitely learn on the job.
I would say that for me, one thing that was challenging to some degree was the number of people involved in collaboratively moving any particular project forward and the number of organizations involved in doing so. And so even though I had my PhD work actually did involve some multidisciplinary teams, and I thank goodness, because I really had to leverage the small set of skills that I had developed, particularly during my time at Digital Promise, but really thinking about how do you drive work forward in a truly inclusive, collaborative way that doesn't get it bogged down in a lot of different opinions. So in my work, you just so much partnership effort, and I had to learn how I had to up-level my project management abilities and kind of strategic partnership abilities in order to really think about how I could drive and lead some of the work while still making sure that the perspectives of all the different partners and all the different players were incorporated. And I think one particular thing I had to learn to do was show my work more. I think in my grad school experience, I didn't show it to anyone until it was really far along and felt kind of perfect. And I had to get a lot more comfortable with showing my, my crappy first drafts and using that to tease out where there were maybe misalignments or misunderstandings between different partners on the project that maybe weren't previously clear, rather than trying to go all the way to something that I was really fully proud of and then having 17 different opinions shift me all the way back to the beginning. So I think some of that kind of it's a combination of strategic partnership and project management up-leveling that had to learn on the job in a much more complex situation where I wasn't solely in control of the research.
Yeah, I have two things. One that's similar to that, which is that a lot of the work that we do at AIR is client facing. And so for me, that was very new, right? Like when you're doing research on your own, or you're just like, I'm my own client, I can do whatever I want. But when in AIR we do a lot of evaluation partnerships, so we're the external evaluator, and it's sort of, I think, kind of like Priya was talking about, it's like this push of like, this is what you want, this is what we think would be interesting, and it's learning a lot about how to ask questions in a way that make them think about things in the way that you're thinking about them, and that sort of like negotiation between your interests and your expertise, and also just the interests of the client. And that was very new. Another thing that I also always found interesting about graduate school, especially being in a school of education, is that there was little to no training in how to teach and or mentor, which was just fascinating to me, as that's sort of everything that we're doing. But and so being an expert in psychology doesn't necessarily make you an expert in teaching or in mentoring. And I think that while I'm not directly like an advisor or a mentor, I do a lot of management of like junior staff and things like that, which is similar, right? And I actually think that those are similar skill sets, and that to some extent in non-academic jobs is actually incentivized a little bit more to be good at it. I think in academia, it's like, if you're a bad mentor, then tough luck for your advisees. But I think you should be a good manager, and that's part of the skill set that you should learn if you're going to be working with junior staff and junior people at your organization. So I think that was something that like I wish I had gotten better training in my graduate work, and definitely have needed to build since I've been here.
Great. I know that, thank you for that resource. That's really helpful, Aubrey. I know something else that came up a lot in questions was about time and about kind of what your days look like. We know that often in academia, days tend to be structured around, certainly everything in the world is structured around meetings, but kind of class times, and then there's not really a start and end time to our days. So it's kind of when we wake up to when we go to sleep. We always think that we should be writing, and it's on us to develop our own skills related to time management if we do ever develop those skills. But kind of what does a typical day look like in your lives?
I'll head off again then. So for me, I was always pretty good at time management anyway. But what I did notice, like in academia, there's not really any time management at all. You just like, as long as you finish your work, it's fine. And just make sure you're, if you're teaching, that you're teaching at the correct time. And other than that, nobody really cares where you're at. I used to joke that like I could just stay home for an entire week, and as long as I finish my writing, then nobody really cares what I do. And that makes it a bit dangerous, I think, in academia, that it's really easy to just finish one more thing, or it's just like add one more thing to your schedule, and then before you know it, you're working like 60, 80-hour work weeks. Some people say that's a good thing, but I don't think so. And with the shift now in the company that I work at now, like my contract is for 40 hours per week. And every week we start the week with looking at what are we going to do this week, and make sure that you stick to those 40 hours. They don't like you going over the 40 hours. Obviously, it's because then like you get in trouble with paying your people and stuff. But mental health is also a big thing there. They don't want us to overwork, because then your productivity goes down. It's weird that the company knows that, but academia seemingly doesn't. So like time-wise, at least in the company where I'm at, time is really respected, and they just want us like to do our 40 hours, so that's 8 hours per day. And since we're also working with clients, we need to justify those hours as well. So I have to make sure that every week I write down what kind of hours I did. But in terms of how I arrange my day, that's kind of up to myself. The only thing that they told me is that they prefer that I'm available between 10 in the morning and 4 in the afternoon for meetings and stuff, because that's where most meetings are planned. And usually between 12 and 1, everyone has lunch anyway, so we tend to avoid meetings during that time. But other than that, my day is, well, when I'm working from home, it's waking up, going to the computer and just doing my work. Lots of meetings in between. And if I go to the office, then it's kind of the same, except it's a different computer. So yeah, in terms of time management, I'd say that there's probably more respect for my time here than there was in academia.
I would jump in and agree, although I think there may be slightly a different angle of this, having only been working remotely, and I can't say that it necessarily will reflect what it will be like in the office. However, that being said, yes, I too have a 40-hour work week, and also typically am in meetings between 9:30 and 5:30 on and off. Remotely, it's been a lot more heavily meeting days, because it's much easier to schedule back-to-back meetings when you don't have to travel from one place to another. So in that regard, the like respect for your time is a little less present, but again, I think that's an artifact of working remotely. But that being said, I have replied to emails, work emails from my phone at like 9 o'clock at night. And I've gotten a text message from my supervisor telling me to get off of my email for my own like benefit. You know, he says, you don't want to set a precedent that you're going to be available for people at all hours of the day, because you aren't. And I've been out of academia for almost 2 years now at this point, about 1.5 years. And I have to say that I think that mindset of I should be doing X takes a very long time to disappear. And it's great to have people working with people that didn't come from academia, who are very much like, oh my God, I can't wait for 5 o'clock and I'm checked out, I'm done, to really ground you in the, okay, the work that I'm doing, like, it's okay, it doesn't reflect my own skill or my own worth if I'm not doing more. Like, I'm here, I'm contracted for this amount of time. Yes, you have your tasks to get done. And admittedly, again, the remote work environment has kind of blurred the lines a little bit about time, because we're all just working from our home. But if we were in the office, I think it's more like there's no expectation. Like, you finish your task. If you have to stay a little bit to finish it, fine. But if you have to pick it up tomorrow, also fine. it's a little bit more fast-paced than academia in that there are more deadlines that are pressing because other people are relying on you, versus like academia, there are few things that are truly, truly time sensitive or else it's done, right? So like grades for your students, you don't want to hold up for several reasons. Applications for grants, yes, time sensitive in the way that if you miss the deadline, you miss the opportunity, but also not time sensitive in the sense that like that opportunity will probably come again in another way. And it's really all about your own productivity and promotion of your work versus like working in an industry, it's clients that are relying on you, right? It's like other people's time and productivity that rely on you getting your tests done. So it's more fast paced in that manner, but at the same time, again, it doesn't feel very like, oh my God, my life is going to fall apart, which I felt a lot as a graduate student. Like, if I don't do this, I'm not worthy. And it's just not like that.
And for me, I think a lot of the skills that I learned in the PhD really, in terms of time management, really have translated to what I'm doing now. Because a lot of what I was doing in grad school was, doing testing with kids in at the National Zoo or in children's museums or doing home visits. And so a lot of my day was, or weekends or evenings, was juggling these different visits and research meetings on top of classes and teaching, and then finding time and carving out time to do my own writing and research as well. So I think one of the things that's important for me in terms of structuring my day is making sure to block off and schedule time for those project-based tasks along with meetings. But I don't have a typical day per se, but it's a combination of everything from discovery meetings with new potential clients to working on different research projects with existing clients. Sometimes I'm doing focus groups or play testing or doing a literature review that helps inform some type of content for a children's book or a TV show or something like that. So a really wide range of tasks. Sometimes it's, a check-in meeting with a group. And so making sure that I have key times blocked off to make sure I'm on task with everything is something that I definitely learned in grad school, and made sure that I had to block off that key writing time at the time that worked best for me, to make sure that that was just reserved.
I don't have too much to add here, but I'll just say, similar to others, my day is there's not a typical day. I wouldn't say I work a 40-hour work week and it always goes from 9 to 5 or 8 to 4. But I will say that I do feel like the work, because of meetings, as others have said, is more confined to specific hours than I would say it was in academia. And I have a young child, and so it's fairly often that I have to leave early to get her from daycare, or right now she's in the background because she has the sniffles, and COVID, can't go into daycare if you have the sniffles. So there is a lot of flexibility in coping with that I have enjoyed in all of my roles, but being in a kind of a startup-like environment since I left grad school, it's really been about getting the work done, relatively flexible schedule, but being available, for those kinds of normal hours, as Kelly spoke about, for meetings. And so I think that's typical. But what has been somewhat refreshing is I do think that there is a lot more respect for the boundaries that I do draw when I draw them. I am able to say, listen, you cannot contact me from 4 to 8 p.m. because that's when I'm with my daughter. But after she goes to bed, I'll come back and check and see if anything needs to be addressed. But there's other people on my team who their cutoff is 5 p.m. and it's not till the next morning, and we respect that. So I do think that has been something that has been different and really appreciated in the sort of non-academic field.
So speaking of meetings, I do have an 11 o'clock that I'm running behind on, so I'm gonna have to jump off. But just to add to this, so at AIR, everything we do is billable hours, and you're billing to a particular client, which was like a weird thing to wrap my head around, because it's just like, you just have this day in grad school, and then someday at the point it's over and you're like, what happened? And here it's, we have a percentage of time that's dedicated to a particular project, which at first I was like, how do I manage all of this? But it actually, ends up shaking out to be about the same, right? You have these tasks to do, you have these hours that you need to build a certain projects, and you sort of filter them. The one thing that I will, if you find yourself in a position of having billable hours, is even though it's the same number of hours, fewer projects is still, like, with more hours is better than like 10 projects with like a small number of hours, because the cost of that turnover from like switching your brain from one project to another can wear on you. So anyway, I should definitely run, but I'm gonna leave my Twitter in the chat if anybody wants to follow up. And thanks so much, Andy, for having me on here, and thanks everybody.
Thanks, Eben. Great. I have a long list of questions, but I want to take a second to see if anyone wanted to ask a question of their own. Great. So I know one question that came up was for folks who are still kind of unsure, who are excited to maybe dip a toe in the non-academic realm, and this may not be true of any of you for those who wanted to kind of leave academia behind, but have you found that there is time to work on kind of passion projects, interests? I know some people who have been able to kind of carve out a percentage of time that is for their own writing. I also know people who don't see themselves going back into academia and don't feel the need to publish in peer-reviewed journals and don't want that time. Can you address whether you've had any experience with that?
Yeah, I think I'm in that position right now, so I think it'd be yeah, it's a good time to talk about it. I am in that position where I don't know what my long-term situation is, so I'm kind of a bit scared to drop the ball on ongoing things that I have going on in the academic realm. So the upside of doing consulting is that it is so flexible. I can do it at any time, and also if I wanted to, I could do less hours because I just like tell them how many hours I've worked. But because of the type of person I am, I never do that. And because of like financial anxiety stemming from before I had money, then I don't do that. So I always work my 40 hours, and then anything else that I'm doing is on top of that. Because when I was doing my PhD, I was actually not overworking. I was like, if anything, probably underworking. Like I would just do like periods of like very intense working, and then like, yeah, probably not even work 40 hours a week, which didn't hurt my productivity. It actually helped my productivity. So then now I am more tired and overworked than I was then, which I think is unusual for most academics. But at least I kind of know that all of those side things are optional, and that if I want to drop them, I can. But it doesn't stop me from being anxious about them, because I am in this in-betweeny bit where I feel like I need to continue with them if I want to, like, if I ever need to prove down the line that I still got stuff done in academia, even though I wasn't in an academic job. But yeah, I wouldn't recommend this lifestyle for any extended amount of time. But for now, it's what I have to do. And yeah, I do have the time because my time is completely managed by myself.
I'm a little the opposite. I went into this job, again, immediately not knowing that if this was going to be long term. I kind of just followed my gut on what I needed for the short term. So I thought to myself, like, when I'm not working, especially in those first few months while I'm still learning on the job, I'll use whatever free time I can to continue to press on with my publications. That included projects I had been collaborating on, getting my dissertation papers fully published. And now that I'm really more ingrained in my work, I've completely paused that. And that's my own wanting to prioritize my own mental health, because knowing I have only the 40 hours a week to do what I have to be paid to do, I now value my non-working hours a lot more, and I don't necessarily want to be writing intensively on that. Sometimes I do pick it up for my own interest because I still love the field, but I don't see it as if I don't publish, something's going to go wrong. Now, that being said, I do still have the option open in the very long term for going back into academia, but I think that I have thought of myself as going back more into the teaching space and less so into the like hardcore research space as much. And I think it's a lot because of my own struggles with academia. And like, I forget who mentioned it. It might have been Priya, but forgive me if I got it mistaken. But someone had mentioned in their introduction just their displeasure with the field as a whole, and really privileging these things that may not be reproducible, and finding, I was just very frustrated that like a lot of the things I was reading just weren't resonating, and they weren't reflecting some of the work that I was doing on the ground every day. And then when it came to publishing that, it's like I had to make a case for why things were different and prove to people that it's okay for things to be different versus like, why isn't things falling in the way it was, right? And I almost want to go back into the field in the academic space to teach and go out and inspire students mostly to not necessarily take everything they read just because there's an RCT behind it to be like word of God, right? Like there will always be something else. There will always be something to disprove what you're reading or other variability, and that we shouldn't necessarily take something just because it has a rigorous scientific trial to be the only way things occur. So I think I'd like to take more of that like hands-on learning experience and impart that knowledge with everyone else. But do I see myself going back into the cycle of like publish or perish type of mindset? I don't think so.
Great. I'm going to open the floor again while I check for the next question. So I know one question that came up that I thought was really interesting was about writing. I know some people have mentioned grant writing. Some people love the formulaic nature of academic writing. Some people hate it. Can you talk about kind of the role of writing in your current positions?
I'll go first now again. So writing, in terms of writing papers or grants, it's not as relevant in my current job as it was in academia, because what I'm doing, like I'm just part of a team, and you have your projects and you finish the project for the client and then they pay you and then it's okay. In terms of writing, it's still very important to be able to express yourself correctly. That is the important part. And that's also another skill that you as a PhD have that you might not really think about. Just because it's not a paper or a grant that you're writing doesn't mean that it's useless. Because right now, when I do an analysis, or if I write a piece of code and you document that, or you need to explain that to someone else, if you can do that well in writing, if you can explain your thoughts, and you can explain your methods, and you can explain what everything means, which is something that we can do as scientists, because that's what we do every day. And that's a very valuable skill. And that's something that I'm still using. And I'm still using every single day, because I have to communicate with others. I have to collaborate with my colleagues, with clients, and with different teams. And writing really helps in that aspect. So even if it's not not writing a paper, it's still a good skill to have.
And in my case, I'm doing writing pretty much every day. It's just a little bit different in terms of what it looks like and who the audience is for. So I might be working on a literature review, but it might be something that's more accessible and brief. so that people can read a top line report and get some sense of what has been done on a particular topic to be able to integrate it into what they're creating. I'm writing briefs or different research protocols, writing blog posts, doing a lot of dissemination type of work. And so writing is really something that I'm doing on a daily basis. It just takes on a different form.
Yeah, I would say similarly, I do a lot of writing in my work, less probably traditional scientific paper writing, although still some of that. I do some work similar to what Kelly is talking about in the chat here, I think, because I play a role both as a funder and an awardee. So I do grant writing to the folks who fund us and grant reporting to the folks who fund us, as well as do justifications of investments that we make as well as a funder. And so that's a lot of writing that I do. And then my previous role, similar to what Laura is saying, a lot of writing to try to think about how to support communication between different folks within the nonprofit education sector. So educators, researchers, and product developers. And that took the form of, it could take the form of tweets, it could take the form of blog posts. Actually did some work writing scripts for short videos, which is how I met Laura in the first place, and things of that nature. And so lots and lots of writing, but just a little bit more creative in the format of the writing.
I didn't realize you knew each other. That's great. Yeah, and I also posted in the chat, I know Eben kind of mentioned that there are different teams who are responsible for different things at some organizations. And so those who are kind of the analysis team may be more deeply involved in writing code and then writing memos about their findings to the people who are writing up the publications or memos, briefs, things like that. Ilsa has a hand raised.
Yes, just maybe a more practical question, which has been a bit touched upon during the whole conversation. But when you decided, okay, I want to apply for some other things, or looking what's out there and getting a new job outside of academia, maybe, what were the difficulties you run into? And do you have maybe advice for anybody that wants to do this? Any tips?
I can go first this time, if you don't mind. So I think one of the biggest difficulties that I faced in terms of approaching the job search was just the breadth of positions that were available and narrowing down on what job titles or even roles or organizations I could see myself fitting in. So first, to me, I kind of approached it like we approach research and thinking, doing a scan of what are the organizations that I know of that I'd be interested in working in, and what do they call their roles, and just forming a list or making a spreadsheet of what are the titles and different roles that I'm interested in to help in conducting that search, and what are the organizations that are really mission aligned with myself, that I could see myself fitting in and really enjoying the nature of the work. And then I think another big factor, something that I learned along the way, is how important it is to have some type of industry experience or exposure to the types of work that you would be doing. So for me, it was looking for any types of experiences, whether it, volunteer or contract-based or project-based, to get some experience with, some small scale types of jobs, to be able to get a better sense both for myself of what I'm interested in, but also to be able to point to in terms of these are the types of projects I've worked on in these different settings, or these are the types of deliverables I can point to that I have been involved with. And I think the other big piece is really around networking. A lot of times people will know of different positions and share them with you. And a lot of times things happen through word of mouth, especially now in my consulting role. a lot of times there are people who refer organizations or, different projects to a specific person that they've worked with in the past or they've developed a relationship with. And so having and building a network of different people who know about you and know about your interests and can look out for you. I think it's so important to have mentors in different spaces, just like you have an academic mentor, find an industry or, alt academic mentor who can also support you in your search and your journey.
If I can add to that, maybe. Yeah, cool. So I think there's also probably a lot of people watching who might not have the ability to do like extra industry experience or anything. So for those people, like if you just want to apply for a job, like if that's the only thing you can do or want to do or whatever your position is, anyway, mind your like the language that you're using, because we're very used to our academic language. You might not realize it, but we use a lot of terms and stuff that people outside of academia just either don't understand or they don't care about. Like you can send someone in industry, like if it's just a regular CV or whatever, you can send them a list of your publications and they will probably not care, because that's like they don't understand how important that is. They don't understand if it's someone who hasn't been in academia. So just as a footnote, they generally don't realize how much work goes into like a single publication. So make sure that if you do send your resume or your CV, like try and change your language, because there's a reason why we have an academic CV and why you can have an industry CV. And you use different terms, like in concrete terms, explain what you did during a project, and not just that you wrote a paper, like you did the research, you wrote a paper. That's like, try and use concrete terms that they understand. And if you did some teaching along the way, mention that as well. Leverage everything you have, and just think about what can be valuable for a company. You can still get in even if you don't have a network, or you don't have a mentor, or you don't happen to know anyone in the industry. It does help if you know someone, or if you already have people who work in industry, just let them read through your CV and they can point out the stuff that like, yeah, nobody cares about that, or I don't understand what that means. So that's something I would like to give to people as a tip. Like, think about making a industry CV that's very different from your academic CV.
I think one of the most difficult things, and it's a little existential, is really knowing your worth. I think negotiating salaries in and of itself is an entirely difficult skill to learn. When you leave academia and enter a whole new field where you don't even know the landscape of salaries or where you're positioned there, I think is an even harder skill to learn. And many times you look at job descriptions, and as a PhD, you feel both overqualified in some of the skills, but also simultaneously underqualified in the field experience that they require. So you look at entry-level positions and you're like, I can do so much more than this and have done more. But then you look at more senior positions and you're like, well, I've never had 10 years of experience doing this. Like, I can't possibly fit. So it is a bit of an existential crisis. So definitely agree with what Aubrey said and reach out and talk to lots of people. I think it's totally feasible to reach out to hiring managers for those jobs and say, is it possible to speak to someone on the team and get a sense of what the day-to-day is like? Talk to them and get a sense of like, hey, this is a complete career trajectory for me. I'd like to learn a little bit more about what is typically expected so that we can have a conversation beyond what you can see on my resume. Because a lot of times, you know, seeing a publication, that's an ultimate outcome of all the things you've learned. And sometimes those smaller things don't come through in a resume. And it's not, for people who don't publish, don't necessarily know that process. So that's one thought. And just, again, the financial portion of it, like, just because you might feel underqualified doesn't mean you are. You've invested a load of time in yourself. The 6, 7, 8, whatever, how long it took you to do your PhD is a huge time investment and skill investment in yourself that you shouldn't undersell. And so my advice would be, when you get to that point, also don't automatically settle for an entry-level position just because you're not part of that, or entry-level salary just because you're not part of that field. I mean, advocate for yourself. You know, your time is worth a lot and you should be able to get paid for the time you've invested in yourself. And of course, there will be something within reason for that position, but it's a hard jump and it's a skill you'll have to learn in any field on how to negotiate yourself, but one that I encourage you all to try to build up the courage to do in a new field.
I think leading on from what Kelly said, I think also there's going to be like massive variation in different jobs for how much flexibility there is with regards to like what you're actually going to be doing. And if you are in a role where there is quite a lot of flexibility there, that can be really good because you can kind of start at a level you feel comfortable with, but then if you do end up taking on higher level tasks, you can then renegotiate salary, which is something that I did in one of my roles. So like I am very like all hands on deck, like I'm definitely happy to like get involved in more high level things once I'm in the role already, but like then that wasn't how my hourly rate was like decided at the beginning, so I was able to say that, and it was like so easy to negotiate higher that I wish that I'd done it like way sooner. Yeah, so that was very new and awkward to me.
Great, thank you. I feel like we all need a little post-it of know your worth somewhere around our desk, even in academia. I know there's limited opportunity for salary negotiation, but still knowing that your time is worth something. So I know we are running close to what is now 12:30 Eastern. I just wanted to close, unless anyone has any other questions, with asking kind of what types of or what were a series of jobs that you were interested in applying for, just so we can kind of get a sense of what else non-academic and alt-academic jobs might look like. So whether that's kind of museum staff, app or startup staff, looking at other education nonprofits or non-education nonprofits, data science work. I would love to get a sense of just a running list of things that people might apply for, and then any closing words of advice I think would be really helpful for folks who are considering applying outside of academia.
I'll take it again. So in terms of what was the first part? Skills and everything. Different jobs that I was looking for, mostly I was leveraging mostly my data science skills. So I was looking for, well, analyst positions, mostly because I didn't have much experience outside of academia. So then you quickly run into what Kelly also said, like you don't have 10 years of experience in the field. So I was looking for entry-level jobs as well. And from a psychology, neuroscience perspective, you also have a lot of skills to do user experience research, for example. Those are also the kinds of jobs that you can look for. And for advice for people, like if you're thinking about it, like just like if you're in academia, you're not sure if you want to go on, just seriously think about a different job. There's nothing wrong with staying in academia at all. Like if that's something you enjoy doing, then just keep on doing that. But a lot of people in my experience, they think that that's the only thing they can do, because you've been in academia for I don't know how many years, and it feels like that's what you're trained for, and that's what you can do, and that's all you can do. But that's definitely not true. Just think about it, and there's definitely stuff you can do. Like data science, it sounds very fancy, especially if you're not in a data science or a mathematic field, but most of the time we're just looking at Excel sheets. And if you can do regressions, you're like 60% of the way there anyway. So like you have a lot of skills, and more importantly, you can learn a lot. That's also part of what being a PhD is. We can learn a lot of new skills, and they will teach you on the job. So you're not stuck in any academic position. You can always go somewhere else. So my advice would be just consider it at least.
I think for those who are interested in doing research in an applied setting, there's so many different types of places to look at. So it could be a children's museum. Right now, I'm a research fellow, actually part-time at a children's museum, the Bay Area Discovery Museum. And we use research to inform every part of the development cycle of the resources that we're creating for parents and educators. You know, thinking about the ed tech and children's media space, people that are creating content, whether it's books or apps or TV shows, really use research as well to inform what they're creating, whether it's the content or, you know, what the experience is like for children. So could be a user experience researcher, research institutes like SRI Education and other big and small, you know, more boutique firms. And then education policy think tanks, a lot of different places to look into.
Great. I know others put things in the chat. Management consulting, data analysts, education consulting, philanthropy, research, think tanks being things like, you can imagine like Child Trends, MDRC, Mathematica, research managers, directors, research scientists, and a lot of these are more at the national level in the US, what I'm familiar with, but I know that there's also a lot of local organizations who are doing similar work. And this doesn't even touch on government-related organizations, especially for folks who are interested in early childhood in the US. I know with the expansion of universal pre-K, there will be a lot of kind of government-related jobs that folks might be interested in. Great. Thank you all so much for being here today. And I really appreciate all of your time and look forward to chatting with you offline another time. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.